Thanks, Nick. Let's go to Canberra now, where our political editor Lyndal Curtis is joined by Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg and Labor MP Kelvin Thomson.
Josh Frydenberg and Kelvin Thomson, welcome to News 24. Kelvin Thomson, if I could start with you, the latest version of My Schools has been released. There has been concern from a few schools about the accuracy of the information. Do those concerns blunt what has been a popular measure?
I think it's been a very popular measure, Lyndal. The fact is that we live in an era where people are expecting information, they're expecting transparency, and what's being provided on the website is information about student progress, about comparing different schools and their performance, and now being able to identify the funding sources for schools. And I think this is all good information that parents are very interested in.
Josh Frydenberg, your Shadow Education Minister Christopher Pyne has been quite critical of the decision to put up the funding information. Isn't it important for parents to know where the money's coming from and where it's being spent?
Look, Lyndal, we question the motives of the Labor Party here. Mark Latham had a school hit list, and Julia Gillard was a great ally of Mark Latham. They've made no secret of their belief that less money should be going to Catholic and independent schools, and we can't see the correlation between financial data and improving literacy and numeracy skills in students. The fact is, and I've got over 50 schools in my electorate, that parents who send their kids to independent and Catholic schools do so because they want to exercise choice, and a lot of them don't have money in their pockets or bucket loads of money in their pockets. They actually make a decision to do that, and they should be supported in doing that. And 33% of kids in our system today go to Catholic and independent schools. So we question the government's motive. We can't see a correlation between the financial data and literacy and numeracy, which is really the objective here.
Doesn't it help, though, if parents can use the information to put pressure on schools over educational outcomes? Can't they use the information to put pressure on governments to deliver more money if they think their school is not adequately funded?
No, look, the government makes its own decisions, and the fact is that we should be continuing to support independent and Catholic schools. Now, the Labor Party has undertaken a review of funding, and what we fear and what the sector fears is that this will be a precursor to a cut in funding for independent Catholic schools. And they've got form on this, Lyndal, with the hit list under Mark Latham.
Kelvin Thomson, isn't there a real fear, isn't there a real perception that your government will move to cut funding when that review is complete?
Well, that's simply scare campaign. The government undertook during the course of the last election that the previous funding formula, the Howard funding formula, would be maintained until 2013, that's to say during the life of this parliament. So that election undertaking has been given. Given that, the only people whose motives ought to be questioned in this are the oppositions. What have they got to hide? What is the problem with information? What's the problem with transparency?
If we can move on to the state of Parliament this week, Kelvin Thomson, Anthony Albanese, the government manager of business in the House, has foreshadowed a possible change of rules to end the sort of motions that Tony Abbott moved this week, which ended question time early. The Greens the Greens MP Adam Bandt has suggested there may be some changes. Doesn't it look a little bit like you're trying to move the goalposts because the other side's been kicking goals?
No, I think question time's about asking questions, and the opposition, if the government doesn't have question time for long enough, the opposition always complains that there's a lack of accountability and they don't have the opportunity to ask questions. So what Anthony Albanese is saying is that question time ought to be about asking questions. That's the purpose of it.
Josh Frydenberg, could Tony Abbott, could your front bench achieve the same aims that he wanted to in speeches by asking questions?
Look, I think this is a significant intervention here from Adam Bandt and Rob Oakeshott and others, because what they're saying is look at the Senate, look how effective it works, but look at the House. And, you know, from our perspective, Labor is running scared, and no wonder they're wanting to change the standing orders on censure motions, because the Prime Minister has failed during question time to actually answer the questions. Paul Keating thought he was too good for Parliament, didn't turn up to question time. Now we're seeing again, the Labor Party not actually participating in question time like they should, using it as a way to provide more information to the public.
But Tony Abbott this week didn't wait for the whole of question time to run before he moved those motions. Wouldn't it be better to adhere to the spirit of question time, let question time run its full length, and then if you're unhappy with the answers, then move the motion?
No, I mean, we had to make a point there, which is the Prime Minister was not doing her duty in question time, Lyndal, which is to answer the question. And particularly around the carbon tax issue, she couldn't provide any information to the Parliament as to why she went back on her promise to the Australian people before the last election. And that's a very significant issue, having major implications right across the economy, and she deserved to be censured for it.
Kelvin Thomson, the temperature was quite hot in the Parliament this week. Do you think that is helpful for the Prime Minister to be seen responding in the way she did to Tony Abbott?
I think the reason why the temperature was hot this week was because of some of the outrageous allegations being made by opposition frontbenchers. For someone like Sophie Mirabella to make that Colonel Gaddafi jibe is disgraceful, and it speaks volumes about the kind of government that Tony Abbott would lead, that he's prepared to keep her on his front bench.
But the Prime Minister responded too with an accusation that the opposition is race baiting.
The accusations that came out this week from opposition frontbenchers, I thought, were disgraceful. And you want to remember that just a few weeks ago, the Leader of the Opposition had his It Happens moment with Mark Riley from Channel 7, and I and other Labor people defended him. We said he would not make light of the death of an Australian soldier. But unfortunately, the Liberal Party does not show us the same respect. There's a French concept called noblesse oblige. That is, if you get to run the country, have an important say in running the country, you've got to observe certain standards of decency and dignity. And they were not being observed by the opposition this week.
You're being way too sensitive there, Kelvin. Just the other day when the Coalition announced it was going to defer some funding to the Indonesian schools, Kevin Rudd had the gall to go out there and say the only person happy with that announcement was Abu Bakr Bashir, somebody who's been implicated in the Bali bombings. I mean, if you are going to be so sensitive, why would Kevin Rudd go and make a comment like that? I think you've got to understand the Parliament is a robust environment and stop trying to be victimised here.
Now, there's been a lot of focus, Josh Frydenberg, on what happened inside the Parliament. Have you been getting much reaction from your constituents to the carbon tax, carbon price plan the Prime Minister announced?
I have, and particularly it's come from small business who feel like this is just going to be an extra burden on them at a time when their costs are going up, and households too. I mean, we are told at $26 a tonne, which is the Treasury's own modelling for a carbon price, that the household electricity bills will increase by more than $300 a year, and that petrol will increase by more than 6 cents a litre. This is a very significant additional burden on families and businesses at every step along the price chain, and I think it will just be passed on, and I'm not sure that the Australian people could will actually want this additional burden on their cost of living.
Kelvin Thomson, have you been hearing from your constituents? Are they wandering in to congratulate you, or are they indeed expressing the same sort of concerns that Josh Frydenberg is hearing?
There are certainly constituents who are expressing concern, Lyndal, and they raise issues like electricity prices. But the interesting thing about electricity prices is that the modelling that was done by AGL on an energy company on the basis of Labor's target of a 5% reduction in carbon emissions by 2020 suggested that by 2015 there would be a cost of $2 a week. Now, set aside the compensation package issue here as well, but a cost of $2 a week, and yet the Liberal opposition feigns indignation about that, but they have nothing to say about the $17 a week impact of rising electricity prices that's been estimated without a price on carbon. We have seen in the home city of Josh and myself, Melbourne, electricity prices rise by over 100% in the last decade, over 50% in real terms. Yet the opposition has had nothing to say about that whatsoever. Last year in the Parliament, I suggested that the electricity regulatory authorities should be asked by the Commonwealth and the states to peg electricity prices to the same percentage amount by which pensions rise. So you get some relief for pensioners and ordinary householders. But you don't hear the Liberal Party expressing any concern about massive electricity price rises that have both occurred and are in prospect. Instead, they're trying to focus on this.
Lyndal,
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I was about to say, Lyndal, what people can't understand is why is Australia going down this path of a carbon tax when other major economies like the United States are not? This is just the Prime Minister going back on her word prior to the last election, and I think that is very significant. And what else is significant is the fact that people see the Greens as dictating the agenda to Julia Gillard, and I know people on Kelvin's own side are worried about this, but the Australian public is extremely worried that while Labor may be in government, Bob Brown and the Greens are really in power.
Well, we'll take that point. There have been ructions internally on both sides. Kelvin, Thomson, there seems to be an internal contest between the right and the left in your party over a Greens motion to remove the ministerial right of veto over territory laws, although keep the parliamentary veto. Is this actually a factional fight over the direction of policy, the direction of the party?
Lyndal, before I turn to that, Josh says, well, the Americans aren't doing it. The fact is that there are 32 countries and 10 states in the United States which have introduced emissions trading. We are not and we are introducing an emissions trading scheme. The fact is that we have a problem. We have a problem. A problem with carbon. The easy thing to do would be to leave it for somebody else, leave it for another generation, leave it for other countries to solve. That would be the easy thing to do, but it's not the responsible thing to do. We are going to do the right thing.
And what about the internal fight in your party?
In relation to the territories legislation, the proposed bill would prevent the government, as in ministers, from knocking over territory legislation. It still would give the Parliament the right to veto or overrule legislation coming from the Northern Territory, the ACT and Norfolk Island. That legislation is going to be the subject of a committee report from the Senate. I expect there'll be consideration of that by the Parliamentary Labor Party once the Senate has presented its report. There could be different views within the Parliamentary Labor Party about that. That's no surprise. We're entitled to have different views on the merits of different pieces of legislation.
Lyndal, can I just say, these ructions within the Labor Party are comical. First, you've got a delegation coming in from the right, Don Farrell, to see the Prime Minister. Then, in response, a delegation from the left. The papers are openly speculating about Greg Combay, with the backing of Bob Hawke, replacing the Prime Minister, or is it Bill Shorten? I mean, let's face it, the role of Prime Minister is not a game of pass the parcel. You can't just choose another leader with much less experience and replace the Prime Minister because you're not happy. And I think these open ructions in the Labor Party are causing massive disquiet among the Australian public.
What do you think then of the differences inside your party over questions of migration and questions of the multicultural policy? Are they helpful to your side?
Look, Lyndal, Tony Abbott has made it very clear that he believes in multiculturalism, and it represents the diversity in Australia and the fact that we are the most successful immigrant country in the world. I'm a big believer in multiculturalism. I'm a product of it myself. My mother was born overseas and both sets of my grandparents were born overseas. So, Corey Bernardi, he said something that he's now said he probably went a bit far, and so, that was a distraction that the Labor Party tried to blow up. The truth is we are right behind Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop. Now with the issue of a carbon tax on the agenda and the government's backflip, we will be absolutely aggressively prosecuting the case against it.
And that's where we'll have to leave it today, gentlemen. Josh Frydenberg, Kelvin Thomson, thank you very much for your time.
Good to talk with you.
Thanks, Lyndal.